What is up, everyone? It's been a minute or two since I've made a video on YouTube, and I felt like most of the people subscribed to me probably don't even remember who I am. So let me introduce myself. I am Joseph. This is Joseph's Place, and I want to welcome you to this video. Now, I know what it looks like. It looks like I just got lazy. I didn't upload a video for, 6 months? And now I'm coming back because I saw some buzzwords on Twitter and wanted to get a few views. And it looks like that because that's exactly what it is. I saw some stuff on Twitter about power creep and wanted to add my 2 cents in. So this is 16 minutes of my 2 cents. Apparently my time's not that valuable, but enjoy the video, and hopefully there's more to come in the somewhat near future. So the first thing I want to do is just define what I mean when I say power creep, just so we're all on the same page. Sometimes people have a little different interpretation of the term, so I just want to make sure everyone's on the same starting point. So when I say power creep, I really just mean any update at all that increases the average power level of the player or makes things, certain challenges or encounters easier. So it doesn't relatively have to pertain to PvM or combat. I will be focusing on combat in this video. In future talks, I don't know, I might discuss how drop tables or how even some skilling things affect power creep. But for right now, I'm going to focus just on the combat aspect of power creep in terms of items and player power. So that's the definition. That's the first part of this video done. Congratulations for making it this far. But now we're going to get into the part of the video where I probably get a little bit too sweaty and over-explain things a little bit too much to make a point. But I'm going to answer the question, is power creep good or bad for old school RuneScape? And I guess to simplify my answer, it's going to be, it depends. Now, I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, and it's not as straightforward as you would have liked, but I think it's the correct answer. And I want to kind of use the rest of this video to explain why I think power creep can be good and what the negative sides of power creep are, and kind of explain my methodology for determining whether an update is a good source of power creep or a bad source of power creep. So the first step is to really explain how power creep can be good and how it can be bad if used incorrectly. So let's start off with the positives of power creep and what power creep can do to be beneficial for a game like old school RuneScape. So one of the main benefits to power creep in old school RuneScape is that it allows newer content or new updates to have rewards that are actual upgrades. And this has a few different benefits. The first is it generates more hype around an update. If you know a piece of content like the Theater of Blood is going to have a really good reward structure, more people are going to be interested in doing that on the first week or the first month of its release, and it brings more attention to the game in terms of advertisement. So from a business perspective, allowing rewards to be actual upgrades is good in encouraging new players to join the game. And I think that's very evident, and it's been proven by just looking at player count numbers before and after certain updates. Now, not every update has an increase in player count, but I think the trend is generally on the upward curve in terms of just the average player count. So it's good from a business perspective as it encourages new players to join and increases the numbers, but it's also good from a game development standpoint because it gives current players a reason to continually play. Without updates, players will feel stagnant and get bored of the current content and will generally just wean off of the game if there's nothing new and exciting. Now, I know there are a handful of players who would prefer that, everything just staying the same continually, and I respect that opinion. I do, but I think generally people are going to be less interested in a game that doesn't have any content releases. And if those content releases don't have anything that's an actual upgrade, or if they don't feel like it's worth doing for them, they're not going to partake in it, meaning they're not going to do it, meaning they're going to be stuck doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that's in general bad for player retention. So I think allowing these updates to have increases in power, it gives current players more variety content to do and more things to do, especially as you get towards the end game. And I think it's just good for player retention in general. And again, I think this is supported by the average player count trend over the course of old school RuneScape's existence. So I'd say those are probably the main benefits of allowing power creep in the game and the good things that power creep can bring to a game like old school RuneScape. Blowpipe. However, I do realize that it has significant negatives, and I want to hit on those really quickly now. I won't be spending as much time talking about the negatives because I think people generally understand the negatives of power creep more than they see the positives, but I do want to hit on just a few points really quickly. One of the biggest negatives that I see with power creep is that as you introduce more power to the game, not only do previously useful items become less useful, but previous challenges become much easier, become less challenging, which leads to what is popularly known as easyscape. And frequent power creep also sets the precedent that other updates need to have these upgrades. And the more you set that precedent, the more it's going to be expected more and more frequently. And I could talk for a long time about the negatives of power creep, but like I said, I think those are more commonly understood, so I kind of want to stop that there just for the sake of time. But in summary, what I'm trying to say is that power creep can be both good and bad for the game, depending on how it's used. It needs to be balanced and it needs to be thought out and planned. And what I want to spend the rest of this video doing is kind of go through my methodology and my thought process that I go through when I look at a new update to determine, in my opinion, is this a good piece of power creep or is this a negative piece of power creep? So when a devlog is released for an item that will be released, that's a new item and will be an upgrade to the overall power of the game, I ask myself 3 questions about that item and use the answers of those 3 questions to give me an initial opinion on whether it's a good or a bad item. And these 3 questions are: how large of an overall power increase will this item bring? How long has it been since the last update to this respective combat style? And what is the barrier of entry for this item and how difficult is it to obtain? So I ask myself those questions about the item, those 3 questions, give it a rating, and if this item has a positive and a healthy rating for 2 of those 3 questions, my initial consideration is that it's a healthy piece of power creep. Now, I use this as a guideline. Keep that in mind. It's not a definite fact. These questions don't 100% determine the healthiness of this item, but I have found that asking yourself these 3 questions is a great starting point for determining whether an item is healthy or unhealthy and gets you started doing the research in order to have a more factual and backed up opinion on the topic. So I'm going to actually use this methodology, and I'm going to go through a few items that have been released in the past and kind of see how it matches up. So the first item I want to talk about is the Toxic Blowpipe. And the reason I want to talk about this item is because it's been in the game for a while, it's well known, and I think it's a good example of what I'm trying to get across. So let's just get started and let's talk about the Blowpipe. So the first question: what is the overall power increase of this item? How much power did this introduce to the game? And the answer is an absolute shit ton. This item introduced a massive amount of power to ranged in general. And if you look at the numbers of the damage and DPS that this item can do compared to what the previous options would be, which would be like an Armadillo crossbow or rune crossbow or knives, you're looking at a substantial increase in DPS, more than probably should be introduced with a single item. So for this specific question, I would rate it very low. I'd rate it very poorly because it introduces a lot of power for one update or for one singular item. So I would rate this on the unhealthy side of power creep. So moving on to question number 2, how long has it been since the last major content release for its respective combat style, which would be ranged? And this actually gets a pretty good rating. I'd give this a positive rating. The last relevant update for range would have been Armadillo with God Wars, so the Armadillo armor and the Armadillo crossbow in October of 2013. So a year and a few months, I think, is a decent amount of time to release an update for a combat style. Now remember, we're looking at just this question and just the dates right now. We're ignoring the amount of power it brings. We'll have that all at the end when we summarize all 3 questions. But for right now, a little over a year is a decent amount of time to wait between releases or between content updates for a specific combat style. So for this question, I would give it a healthy or a positive rating. And the last one is barrier of entry. Now, I would give this a really bad rating for a few reasons. One, the way you obtained the item for the Blowpipe was not only fairly easy, with Zulrah being a boss, but it was also continually profitable. Since its release, Zulrah has just been a really good source of generating money. It's been a good source of GP per hour, even to this day. Maybe not the best, but it's been adequate and it's been competitive with other top methods, especially for that mid-level range. So the barrier for entry for this is very low because no matter what, you're making money because of the drop table of Zulrah. You're always making money. You're always making a profit, and it will always be worth it. Compare this to the God Wars dungeon, where you have items like Armadillo chest piece. Let's use that as an example. You're killing Armadillo boss, and you're looking for this one item. If you don't get this one item or one of the other uniques, you're not going to be making a lot of money. So it's only worth it if you get those drops, which makes killing the Armadillo boss a little less enticing because you're not making that continual profit. But with Zulrah, you are making that continual profit. You're making money off of the regular drops, and you're making money off of the uniques. Now, the Blowpipe does have a degrade feature on it, which would make it a little bit of a higher barrier for entry because you would have to continually pour money into it. But again, remember that this boss is just really, really good for making money in general, to the point where it's not, and it's shown over the years to have not been too much of an issue, and it's kept this item at a very low price point for the amount of power that it brings to the game. So I would give this a really bad rating for its barrier to entry. So if you put all these together, the power increase leans on the bad side. Time since last update, that's a good one, so we'll give that a good rating. But the barrier for entry being low means that we're gonna lean towards giving it a bad rating in terms of power creep, which would give it an overall rating of being unhealthy or being a bad update. And I stand by this, and I think that it has shown to be true over the years that the Blowpipe has been released. I think it brought way too much power into the game for one item and one update, and I think it's definitely made things easier in old school RuneScape. If you look at the fight caves, that got insanely easier with the release of Blowpipe, because of just the amount of DPS you're doing. Not only made it faster to do it, but also made it easy because of the low price point of the Blowpipe. So it made it easier for lower to mid levels to get access to the fight caves and be able to complete it, and it just increased their power, making them able to complete it faster and helping people who weren't able to complete it before have a much easier time. And I'm not saying people shouldn't have easier times with newer updates, but I think the amount of power in the Blowpipe was just too much for a single update. So that's an example of probably one of the more extreme examples of an unhealthy power creep, an update that just was not overall probably good for the game. And now, just because I can, I'm going to kind of just spitfire a bunch of different updates and kind of use the same methodology on those updates as well. I'm going to try to go through them quickly because there's quite a few here and I don't want to take too much time. But the next item I want to take a look at is the Tentacle Whip. So let's quickly go through these 3 questions and see what we come out with. First question, power increase. How much power increase did the whip bring to the game? A decent amount, but I would lean on the side of it being an okay or a healthy amount. It brought 1 max hit and a small accuracy increase, as well as introducing Venom to a melee. However, I don't think the Venom is really that substantial, so I think the 1 max hit and the small accuracy increase leans it on the decent side. It's not a ton of power, and I think it's an appropriate amount for a single release or a single item. Time since last updates for melee specifically, we'll give this almost strictly like an okay score. I think it was just over a year since the release of Bandos, which would have been the last substantial melee update. So it's not a great time frame, less than the Blowpipe, but I think it's an okay amount of time, right smack dab in the middle of good and bad. So we'll just give that a moderate rating. And then the barrier of entry, I would actually consider this very good. While the secondary component, which is the Abyssal Tentacle, is very easy and cheap to obtain, the base components, the Abyssal Whip, I would say is in a good spot. It's not something you can grind out for efficient GP per hour or efficient XP per hour. You have to go out of your way to go and get a whip at the time of the Tentacle's release. So I would say that the rarity or the trade-off of, not doing a Zulrah-like encounter where you're constantly making money, but still needing that as a secondary component, and having the degradation of the Tentacle Whip be a complete destruction of the item, needing a brand new whip. I would say all of those things combined lead to a decent barrier for entry. It's not locked behind a difficult boss, but it's locked behind a few steps that are fairly time-consuming and not efficient. So based on those questions, I would consider the Tentacle Whip a good piece of power creep and introduce healthy things into the game. The last item I want to look at is the Dragon Hunter Lance, since it's something a little bit more recent. So the power increase for the Dragon Hunter Lance, I would rate this on the good side of okay. So I'd give this a positive rating. It's a fair DPS increase for its niche. However, unlike the Twisted Bow, its niche is not widespread. It's very specific to a few encounters. The encounters that it is specific on, it's very, very good at, but similar to the Dragon Hunter crossbow, it's only a few places, and I think it's a decent amount of places for the amount of power it introduces. Time since last update for the Dragon Hunter lance, I would say this is on the bad side of things. Theater of Blood, I think, was only just about 6 months prior to the Dragon Hunter lance, and 6 months is not a great amount of time, but I would say that 6th month is kind of the cutoff for me to where it starts to not be too great. So I would put this on probably the negative side. The barrier for entry, I'm going to rate this good. Now, that's probably my personal opinion, and you don't have to agree with that completely, but I think it's a good barrier for entry. The main component is a drop from a boss that I would consider not consistently great for GP per hour, which is Zammy. You're looking for a Zamrock Spear from, like I said, a boss that's not really consistently a good GP per hour money maker. And also a rare drop from Hydra. Now, granted, the Hydra can be profitable, so you have one profitable and one not so profitable boss that you need to drop from. And I would say that's a decent barrier of entry for an item like this. Maybe not a great barrier for entry, a super healthy one, but I'd say it's on the good side. So overall, based on those parameters, I would give this a healthy rating because it met 2 of my 3 qualifications. And like I said, these ratings are kind of just a starting point or a guideline, and then I would go off from these answers and do my own research and make a final determination after that. But what I wanted to do with this video is just give my opinion on how power creep should be introduced and kind of give my mindset for you guys as you're voting in a poll when you're going to determine, is this item going to be too much, going to be too powerful for the game in its current state. And I just wanted to talk about it. I wanted to give my perspective on power creep, show the good sides of it, but also show the bad sides, and really give you my mindset of what makes a good or bad version of power creep. But that is all I have for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy. I apologize that it was a little long and a little all over the place, but I just wanted to kind of speak my mind on this topic. So I hope you guys did enjoy it. I want to talk about something similar, except with drop tables sometime in the near future. So not focusing so much on item drops, but kind of focusing on how drop tables affect power creep in a different way. But we'll see if I actually get to that. If that is something that you would be interested, let me know in the comments. But that is it for this video. Hope you guys did enjoy it. I will see you next time.